Welcome to year 3 of the Funding Love podcast with Mal and Kate. We are two adoptive moms that seek to love, support, and elevate all corners of the adoption triad while running our nonprofit Funding Love.
In year 3, we will be talking all about parenting, Disney, adoption, and more with an all-star lineup of incredible guests, both inside and outside the adoption community.
So grab your favorite beverage and pull up a chair,
because everyone has a seat at our table.
Together, we are Funding Love,
the podcast.
Hello, and welcome back to the Funding Love podcast. We are on episode 109, and today, Caitlin and I are joined by a really fun guest we can't wait to talk with, and his name is Brady Murray. He is a dad and nonprofit founder. So welcome, Brady. Welcome to the Funding Love podcast.
Thank you for having me on the show. Excited to be here.
Yeah,
this is going to be awesome. Yeah, we're going to be learning a lot about you, Brady, and this organization that you have. But give our listeners a little intro of who you are. Tell us about your family, where you live.
Absolutely. So I reside here in Utah, and I have a beautiful family. Adoption is a major part of our life, as well as special needs. Disability is a major part of our life. So we have 11 children as a family, 7 of which are adopted. Honestly, having 11 kids is even weird here in Utah. And so we are definitely outliers. We have 2 boys that have Down syndrome, one biological son, one adoptive son, and we're just living the dream. And so as I shared, we're super involved in the Down syndrome special needs community and the adoptive community. My wife and I founded a nonprofit in 2013 called Rod's Heroes. And our purpose is to inspire families to answer the call to adopt a child with Down syndrome, other unique circumstances. So that's a little bit about us.
I love that. So I do have to ask, did you always plan on having a large family? Like, did you and your wife always want a lot of children, or was it like, oh, we'll have 1, 2, maybe 3?
Yeah, our debate as we were engaged and as we were considering starting our family was, I said, really, I feel good about 3. And Andrea was really pushing for 5. And so I said, look, let's settle in the middle with 4. And here we are 11 kids later. So.
Wow.
That is amazing.
That is amazing. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I've heard of many families with 11 plus children these days. You know, like my grandmother's one of 13, but that's different generation, different, you know, we're talking different conversation there, but wow, that's awesome. So cool. I'm excited to hear about Rod's Heroes. But I would love to ask this question because I know a lot of people probably do wonder this as well. All of the emotions of becoming new parents, emotional, scary, nerve-wracking, all of that, to hear the unexpected diagnosis of Down syndrome when your son was born. Walk us through that moment for you and your wife and all of the feelings and emotions that came into play.
Of course. We were blessed with a beautiful girl. Brindley was our first child. And shortly thereafter, we were able to welcome Nash into our family. And so we had our beautiful girl. We were expecting our beautiful son. Everything seemed to be working out exactly how we had envisioned and hoped for. Me as a dad, I'm a dad's dad. I love sports and baseball, and I couldn't imagine, or I could just imagine taking Nash, hiking and fishing and playing baseball. And I envisioned state championship baseball games, and I envisioned the day, Nash was married and that he was a dad, and just all those things as you're kind of getting ready to be able to welcome this child into your life. And I'll never forget the moment that Nash was born. Andrea did such an amazing job through the labor and delivery. I was so nervous, but yet so excited. And before I knew it, there he was. And I'm just taking pictures and videos and just, counted 10 fingers, 10 toes. He's perfect, and I just couldn't have asked for a better moment and just such a special time in our life. About 10 minutes after Nash was born, I remember the doctor coming over to me, and he put his arm around my shoulder, and he said, "Brady, I want to talk to you." And he walked me back to like the farthest place away in the delivery room. And he said, "Brady, we think that your son has Down syndrome." And that was a very raw moment, a very real moment for me. I became emotional immediately. Just everything that I had been dreaming about seemed to vanish away, and I didn't know what was going to happen. Fear was an overriding feeling that I had,
Mm.
and then I got really, really scared because I knew that I had to go tell Andrea what that doctor just told me, and she didn't,
Mm.
and I didn't know how she would react. And so I gathered myself. I walked over to Andrea. I knelt down and was just had big tears coming down my face. And she grabbed my hand. She said, "Honey, what's wrong?" And I choked out the words. They told us they think Nash has Down syndrome. And then I looked at her to see how she would react. And Andrea looked down, and about as fast as she looked down, she looked right back at me and she said, "Great. Can I hold my son?" And I knew in that
Oh my
moment
God.
that it
Oh
was
my gosh.
okay.
Yeah.
And Nash has been the source of inspiration and love and light and joy in our family. That honestly, that's a large reason why we have so many children, is because of the joy and the love that he brings into our family, and he is the glue of our family. So that's Nash.
Mm.
Oh, oh my
You
goodness.
guys
Like, I mean, you got us.
bargained for yeah, you got us there. A few minutes in, here we are. I love that, because
Wow.
all of the dreams that you had, right? All of the expectations, all the things that you had lined up in your head for you and your son, it seems were exceeded
Yeah,
in a very unexpected way. So that
no
is
doubt.
that
No
is
doubt.
Yeah. So you and your wife now are advocates for children with Down syndrome and Down syndrome adoption. So like where was that shift? Like was it in that immediate moment with your wife when she's like, he's my kid and I love him and let me hold my baby? Or like did it take some more time to come to a point of like where was that shift in perspective to where you guys kind of
Yeah.
threw the fear aside and became more passionate about helping? I love the words that you used when you talked to us about it before the recording, where you say you like to help turn their special needs into special abilities. So, like, where was that shift?
Yeah. So when we welcomed Nash into our family, it in in that moment I knew everything was going to be okay, but I was not okay. It took me some
Sure.
time, right? And it took Andrea some time, but we believe wholeheartedly that life entrusts us with experiences. Some of these experiences we choose for ourselves, other experiences life entrusts and chooses for us. This was an experience that life chose for us, and we believe that it's going to be for our good to ultimately be able to help other people. And so we believe in this concept of serving the pain that you know best. And so we got super involved in the Down syndrome community, just leaned into it as best as we could. Then it wasn't until about 4 years later that through that involvement in the Down syndrome community, we had an experience that was that shift, if you may. And
Mm-hmm.
we had a family over that was just had welcomed a little girl into their life, a little baby that has Down syndrome, and we're just getting to know them and talking through all the emotions that they have, and just kind of out of nowhere they said, "Hey, have you ever heard what happens to kids with Down syndrome in like a lot of developing countries when they receive the diagnosis?" I'm like, "What?" And they said they are abandoned. They're left.
Mm-hmm.
The mom said, these kids go to orphanages and they'll stay in these orphanages, and then they'll go to adult mental institutions when they're like 4 or 5 years old, and these kids like die. I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And so I remember that night I went and just started to research the heck out of this. And sure enough, I learned and saw pictures of kids that were the same age as my son, my little 4-year-old Nash, that were skin and bones, that were away in orphanages that are like little prisons for kids, and that they're in these cribs and they're locked in these cribs, these beautiful kids that have Down syndrome. And that light that I love in Nash was just not there. You could clearly see this Down syndrome, but it was just not there. And in that moment, I'm like, I can't stand on the side and let these kids not have a shot. They just need a shot.
Mm-hmm.
So that's actually the switch, if you may, where Andrea and I said, we need to do something to help these orphan children that have Down syndrome get a family. And that ultimately is where the twinkling of this little source of inspiration came for Rod's Heroes to be created.
Yeah. Wow.
Gosh, so tell us what that is. Tell us about Rod's Heroes.
Yeah,
What that stands for, what that
Right.
is. Yeah.
"Are you Rod?" I said, "No." And so in that moment, we did more research, and we found there's actually families that want to adopt these kids, and they're willing to adopt these kids, but they can't afford to adopt these children. So on average, national adoption right now is running about $45,000
Mhm.
be able to adopt a child with Down syndrome. And for most families, that was just too much.
Yeah.
They're not going to be able to find a way. So we thought if we could find a way to fundraise, create an adoption grant for these children and bridge that gap for those families, maybe that would help them. And Andrea had the idea. She said, okay, I got a fundraising idea. This is totally random. You just have to know Andrea. She goes, I got this idea. She goes, why don't you run an Ironman triathlon? They raise awareness and funding for a kid. I remember looking at her, I'm like, "Honey, why don't you run an Ironman?" Right? And so,
No, thanks. Yeah.
honestly, I had never done an Ironman. I had done a triathlon, and I had mentioned to Andrea at some time, like, "Maybe someday I could do an Ironman," but that's, like, not happening. The triathlon that I did is kinda like swim to the end of the pool, bike
Yeah.
around the block, and run to the end of the street type.
Yeah.
And she's like, "No, honey, like, I think you could do it." And so I started to think about that, and I said, "You know what? Honestly, I probably could not do an Ironman for myself, but if one of these kids gets a family because I did an Ironman, I'm gonna do it." And I saw something happen in that moment or over the next few months, and I witnessed something, and that is I learned a principle that is, if you allow yourself to get caught up in a cause bigger than yourself, you will witness miracles, and I witnessed a miracle. I was invited actually to race in the Ironman World Championship that year,
Oh,
and
wow.
they featured my story on NBC. And so this idea that Andrea had of like, hey, why don't you do this? There's no way we could have said, and let's go do that and get on national TV to get these kids exposure. But that
Mhm.
transpired. And so when that story aired all over the world, actually, we had people from all over the world saying, we're Ironman triathletes. We want to do this too. We want to help these kids. And immediately my entrepreneurial hat turned on. And that's where the inspiration for racing for orphans with Down syndrome or RODS.
Oh,
That's how we started,
love it.
was an Ironman.
Wow. Okay. Racing for orphans with Down syndrome.
That's right. And that was
Wow.
2012 when I ran that.
Wow. So
Wow.
how does it operate these days? Do you just have people who sign up to be racers? Under
What's so amazing about that is we've evolved so much over
Okay.
the last decade plus. We still are involved in racing. A little funny side note is for Christmas this year, actually on New Year's, I said, "Hey, honey, I got a great idea." And I said, "Why don't you do an Ironman triathlon to help a kid with Down syndrome?" And she's like, "All right, I'll do it if you do it." And so we actually are racing in the Ironman St. George, which we haven't raced for like 7 years, her and I.
Wow.
Side note, hopefully we don't die. But we've
Yeah.
actually evolved the model significantly over the years where more than anything, what we're doing now is storytelling. And so we
Uh-huh.
go in country, we meet these children, we capture the light that is in their eyes,
Yeah.
those smiles, and then we go and we do storytelling. So that's really our MO right now.
Wow.
That's incredible.
Yeah, that's amazing and so impactful. So, do you still do or host races for people to sign up for, or and
We
haven't done that in a while?
we actually our biggest program that we have right now is more for children, believe it or not. And so it's
Okay.
called Heroes Club. And so it's a running program where children will run throughout a summer in running groups. We call them they're captains or run by captains. And for example, last year we had over 25,000 miles that were ran, all the way the equivalent of running around the world by these children in the
Wow.
summer. And we raised just shy of $50,000 as well through their efforts this last year. So
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, that's a whole adoption right there.
that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that is so awesome. So, just remind me, and this is a little bit off topic, but like am not a runner. I'm trying to quit. I ran like a half marathon like in 2015. But what exactly is an Ironman? What do you do in an Ironman? You run,
Yeah,
bike, and how many
you
miles?
go swim 2.4 miles, bike 112, and then you wrap it up with a marathon.
With a marathon.
Wow.
26 miles.
Yeah,
Man.
it's
Wow,
a
wow,
lot.
wow. Wow,
It's
wow.
crazy. Yeah, it's a lot.
That's really incredible. And it's really cool to see the growth and change in your organization too,
Mhm.
to help support others. So how many, I mean, this is just me asking questions, but how many orphans have you guys seen placed since 2013? Like, what kind of
Yeah.
impact have you made so far?
Yeah, we're at 94 children with Down syndrome have been adopted, and we're in the hundreds of children as a whole. And so
Wow.
That's
I
incredible.
yeah, I in fact I'll share with you something that I feel I should share this. We were just over the last number of months we've been really looking at this closely. We estimate that the cost or the amount of money that has been spent thus far over the last decade plus of these families that we've inspired to adopt is just shy of $10 million of what they have spent to adopt internationally. And so, as I shared, $45,000 to adopt internationally, that's for one kid. If you're adopting more, that costs a lot more. And
Mhm.
some had one adoption last year that cost $75,000 for a child with Down syndrome from
Wow.
a different part of the world. And so it's super, super expensive. And a large part of the reason why it's so expensive is there's a lot of inefficiencies that exist within the adoption process. So Andrea and I, as I shared, we just adopted these 4 kids from Colombia. And I kid you not, the stack of papers, it's hard to get it all in here. In fact, I can't. It's like a foot high of paper that we filled out. And we literally filled them out with a pen and paper, every single page. And it's super, super inefficient. So it's a
Mhm.
significant part of that cost. But long story short, we have a model that we are launching that will cut that cost at least by 50%. And so what my vision is to be able to make this much more feasible for a family
Mm.
to be able to adopt, not just financially but also an efficiency from the time that it takes, because it takes well over a year to be able to start to finish. And so that is the vision of Rod's Heroes and what we are currently doing. We just had a sizable donation come in yesterday to be able to help us move forward on this work, but our vision is to I don't want to say disrupt because that sounds so negative, but I am going to say disrupt
Yeah.
the adoption process and making it much more efficient, much more economical, and much more efficient from a time standpoint for these families to adopt. And so,
Mhm.
over the next 10 years, the $10 million that we raise that got a couple hundred kids home, what if we could make that 1,000 kids for the same
Right.
cost? And so
Right.
that's the vision that we're
Such a
Yeah.
taking.
worthy cause. I
That's
love that.
amazing.
That is
Yes.
amazing. That because I mean, even domestically speaking, though, adoptions aren't much different as far as cost
Mhm.
goes. Now, efficiency might be better just because we're in America and you have, the internet, computers, that sort of thing.
Yep.
But I still do think there is a lot of disruption, if we're going to use that word, that could also happen here. So I love that you're taking that on and that you see such a bigger picture. That is, I mean, that's inspiring. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Mhm. Yeah, because I feel like you're talking about all the children and families can get children home quicker, but, like, the reverse of that is we're getting children out of orphanages quicker and
Right.
into a family that's gonna help with their care and love them and support them, and, that's super important to make that as efficient as possible
That's
so these
right.
kids aren't waiting. I love that. I love that so much. So for people that are listening, I just had a couple of questions about your experience with Down syndrome, just to kind of inspire our listeners, those who maybe have had that nudge or the thought or
Right.
the calling and they're just afraid to move forward. I just want to ask this question. Like, how has your life changed for the better because you had that moment where the doctor pulled you to the side and said, I think your son has Down syndrome? Like, I know that there is a lot of hard that can come from that and unexpected, like, just differences that life throws at you. But how is your life better because of that?
I'll get super emotional talking about this, but I'll share an example, a real life example that I would say is very symbolic of what the last 16 years has been for me having a son that has Down syndrome. So Nash was born on July 6th of 2007, and my 10-year class reunion was 3 weeks later.
Mm.
Okay. And so if you think back to your 10-year class reunion, your classmates, you are all graduated from high school or from college. You're professionals. You finally are starting to make money, and that's a class reunion that oftentimes is quite vain, unfortunately, right?
Right.
But like, you don't look old. You're still,
You're showing
know,
off a little bit, right?
that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so I share that just to kind of set the stage. So I remember in the leading up to that class reunion, I am holding this little boy and thinking, like, I'm going to go to this class reunion and I'm going to tell my classmates, this son that I thought I was going to tell him about how he's going to be this baseball player in these state championship games, and he's going to take over my company when I retire, and like all those things that are quite worldly, but we think in our minds those were not options. And I was going to go tell my classmates that I have a son who has Down syndrome, and I'm going to be caring for him for the rest of my life. And it allowed me to have a different perspective on what's most important, right? And so I remember going to that class reunion, and I remember having those conversations, and I was still like, oh man, the emotions are so raw. But then I saw my classmate who I'd forgot all about, Patrick, that has Down syndrome.
Mm.
And he was there with his dad. And I thought, you know what? That's me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be taking my son to their class reunion. And I couldn't be more thankful that I had that perspective that took off all those things that 2 weeks, 3 weeks earlier were so important on, like, where are you working and how are you, all of that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
About what a blessing it is now that I get to consecrate my life to this child. And in turn, look at what this child has already done for me 4 weeks into this thing.
Mm.
So now compound that over the last 16 years of taking off that natural man, if you may, of like worldly focus and being able to focus on what is most important. And that's what having a child with Down syndrome does for a person and for a family. And so much so that we're inspired by that we went and we adopted another little boy that had syndrome. This is him right here in this picture. And I want to share his story. Cooper was found placed on a street corner when he was 6 months old in a city of 14 million people in mainland China. So early one morning, there's this beautiful little boy wrapped in a blanket and placed on a street corner for somebody to find him. The authorities came, they took him to an orphanage, and that's where he stayed for the first 4 years of his life, until Andrea and I felt in our heart that we were supposed to adopt. We adopted Cooper, and I'll tell you right now, that was not an easy decision. We had a child with Down syndrome. It was not logical to have another child with Down syndrome, but we felt in our hearts something that was saying we should do this. And so we adopted Coop, we brought him home, and he's just life of the party Coop. He's amazing. What I've learned from adopting Cooper is everybody, especially those that have what the world would describe as a disability, have a purpose, even a divine purpose in life.
Mm.
They have a calling, they have a reason for being here, and they have a work that they need to do. And so we have engaged in helping Cooper to sing the song that he is meant to sing, because that boy absolutely has a purpose. We had a miracle transpire last year where Cooper loves baseball, and through nothing short of a miracle, he got invited to throw out the first pitch at the Chicago Cubs game at Wrigley Field. And he's a good little baseball player, and he throws this pitch and he's just celebrating and doing such a great job. And it's just a special moment. And I thought, okay, that was once in a lifetime. We're forever thankful for that. Well, 2 weeks later, he got invited to throw out the first pitch at Fenway for the Boston Red Sox. What this has created is an opportunity for Cooper to go to all 30 MLB stadiums and throw out the first pitch for a purpose. And the purpose is to show that everybody has purpose.
Yes.
Have a divine role, even a child that was found on a street corner in a city 14 million people that was abandoned there, that you would never have a shot at life. That kid is singing the song he's meant to sing, and he's doing so in and through the service of others, and proving and showing others that you too have purpose. And ultimately, we also hope to get a lot of kids adopted through this. So
Wow.
it's fun to see how it's working out.
That is amazing. I want to come to a baseball game and see him throw a pitch. I need to know his schedule.
We will be in Florida. In fact, both the Rays and the Marlins have invited us to come out. So we'll be in Florida in 2025.
Okay, you send us the dates for
Please,
real.
please.
My family loves baseball,
the
and
Marlins
we'll
Stadium
go.
is like 40 minutes from us, so
Yeah.
we'd love to see that. That is so
Yes.
cool. I do have to comment on just you're telling us how it makes you better, makes your family better, makes you just strip away of the worldly things and realize what matters. I was telling somebody about this podcast that we were going to record with you and give them a little bit of the background on you and your story, and they were telling me, they said, I worked at bookstores for years, and I owned a couple bookstores, whatever. And she had worked for somebody who owned a bookstore, and they had this program where they hired kids with Down syndrome to work there. And they said it was a really cool program and those kids worked hard, showed up on time, loved what they did. She said, but the owner said, do you know why I'm doing this? I'm not doing this necessarily for them, although I am. It makes everybody else better. It makes everybody here better workers, better people. And that was part of the purpose of doing that program. But I think that speaks so true to what you're saying, is it makes everybody around them better. And I think that is so special. And I love that. I mean, I don't know. I'm crying this whole time you're talking, because not only is it powerful the way you're telling the story, but it's also true. And it helps us bring perspective in our life. And even the little things we complain about here is, if we could see life, the light of those children, what a difference that would be, for all of us.
With Nash and Cooper, when you meet them, and when anybody meets them, they immediately know, and this is the same for all individuals with Down syndrome, and really in the disability community, they know that they are not judging them. That they see them for who they are, their very best self, their divine self, right? And they accept them for exactly who they are. And so they're just happy to see them, and they give them a great big hug and so nice to meet you. But that's that superpower that these individuals have. And so, maybe they're not going to pass a college math class, but you know what? These kids are going to help us to become who we're supposed to become. And that's a superpower.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what would you say to one of our listeners or watchers now on YouTube, to a parent or a prospective adoptive parent that wants to do this, but just has those hesitations or has those fears? Or I'm sure that your story has already inspired them, but is there any other practical advice or, I don't know, inspiration that you can give?
Absolutely. So there's been 3 different times that Andrea and I have answered the call to adopt. And every time it's gotten harder. Okay. Every time it makes less sense. It's less logical. Doesn't pass the smell test, as I like to say. But every time there is one common denominator, and that is in our quiet moments when we're being very, very honest with ourselves and seeking inspiration as to what we are supposed to do, we feel in our hearts what we're supposed to do. And it is not a neon flashing sign. It is not an overpowering, go and do this. It is just the smallest little seed in our hearts that we feel, and we know that this is what's being asked of us. So this is what we're supposed to do. And in every case, all 3 cases, in the non-quiet moments of our life, when we think about it, it is like red flags. There's the neon sign saying, don't do this.
Right.
You talk to your parents, you talk to your siblings, you talk to your friends and ask them what they think. And everybody's like, don't do this. Don't do this. It's not logical. You're crazy, right? But then you go back to that quiet moment. And when you're really grounded and you're truly trying to seek to do the right thing, you know what you're supposed to do. And 3 times now, we've answered that call. We've held on to that tight, that little seed, and we've nourished that seed, and that seed has grown. and has turned it into the most beautiful blessing that Andrea and I have in our lives. And that's our 11 amazing kids. And so there's no amount of professional success that I could ever experience, that Andrea could ever experience, that would make up or replace what we've experienced through being willing to answer the call to adopt. So that's what I would encourage him to do, is seek out in a quiet place what you're supposed to do. If you feel it, like, hang on to that and go for it. Take your vitamins.
Lean into it because you can, even while on the journey, and you say, yes, I have this nudge, I'm going to lean into it, I'm going to think about it, pray about it, all of the things. And then okay, we're going to do it. You jump into the journey, and then you have this happens on the journey, this happens on the journey, this happens on the journey. All of the things that feel like reasons that could make you say, okay, well, that's it, I'm done. But you have to hold on to, like you're saying, and I think that is so important to hold on to, like that purpose that's in that you feel like
That's right.
at the end of your life, if you don't obey this or answer that call, that's going to feel unsettling. You have to hold on to that, because there's a million reasons not to.
That's right.
A million reasons to stop, a million reasons to not go forward. And I applaud you guys for holding on to that. Even though there's naysayers, even though there's all of that, because your family's beautiful. What a blessing that, they have you, you have them. Such a cool story.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, this has been honestly so much fun, Brady, and we appreciate your vulnerability. You've made us cry this whole episode. Anybody who's watching on YouTube will just see Mel and I, wiping them away. But they're real tears, because you've moved us, and I know you're moving our listeners, and I'm hoping, that you touch them in the places they need to be for their heart to kind of maybe answer that call that they've been wanting to and feeling like they need to. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for joining us on this podcast. This is so awesome. And I applaud you and your wife. Yeah, go ahead. I want to hear.
One closing comment that I want to share. I want to commend you guys for the work that you guys are doing, because as I said, I've experienced it 3 different times. There's amazing feelings and there's hard times and everything, but it's such a beautiful journey with so much support to be able to get to that place where you bring that child home and everybody is there supporting you. But after that, guys, like, it is lonely. It is a lonely place. And so the service that you guys are providing for families, to be able to give them this experience that is a bonding and a healing and a uniting experience for these adoptive families, is not just an experience, but it's a lifetime of foundation that is going to be able to help them to have success in the future. And so I just highly commend you for what you're doing. And I encourage anybody that is listening to look at donating to this organization, because what you are doing is making a real life difference in families just like mine, that, believe me, guys, we need all the support we can get on this adoption journey. So it's so great work.
So
yeah.
true.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you. It's very true that adoption is not just like this one-time thing that we do. It's not an event just for us and our children, a changing of last names. It is a lifetime commitment of, being and parenting through that, living through that, and all the situations that arise. It's just like Shrek says, like, it's an onion. You're adding more layers to your life that are beautiful layers, but they're hard too. And so,
one closing thought as well. We went to Armenia last year in September, and we witnessed another miracle. While we were there, we were able to have 23 children that have Down syndrome, ages 6 and under, be introduced to us and their files shared with us. And Armenia pled with us, please help these children find a home. So far, we've been able to find homes for 6 of those 23 children, but we still have work to be able to do. Somebody is feeling in their heart that maybe they should consider adopting a child that has Down syndrome. We would love to talk to you about these beautiful, beautiful children in Armenia, because they are awesome. So,
well, tell our listeners how they can get connected, how they can find you, how do they reach out?
Yep, it's super simple. rods.org is our website. You can also follow us on Instagram. That's where we're doing all of our storytelling, and our handle is Rod's Heroes on Instagram.
Awesome.
That's awesome. Listen, we're in this together. That's why we all have our piece here that we feel called to. So we're doing this together. And thank you, Brady, once again for joining us. And thank you, listeners, for tuning into this episode of the Funding Love Podcast. We'll see y'all next week.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Funding Love Podcast. We are a crowd-funded nonprofit, which means that people like you can help make a lasting impact in the lives of adoptive families and birth moms. At Funding Love, we create post-adoption experiences that strengthen bonds, build community, and restore people. And when you partner with us, whether that is giving online, signing up to become a monthly donor, or simply buying merchandise from our shop, you are funding love.